nobody expected this moment to actually arrive. Not after all the years, the reconciliations, the late-night promises, and the emotional resets that kept this relationship alive. But this time, the air felt different. Jenny wasn't packing out of anger. She wasn't threatening to leave to make a point. She was quiet, steady, and heartbreakingly calm. The kind of calm that only comes when someone has finally reached the very edge of themselves. For viewers who have followed her journey from the beginning, this scene didn't feel dramatic. It felt devastatingly real. You could almost sense the heaviness in the room, the silence that said everything they weren't saying out loud. After more than a decade of choosing love over logic, comfort, and familiarity, Jenny had reached a place where staying meant slowly losing herself. And the saddest part? She looked like a woman who had already accepted that reality. This wasn't just another fight. This was the final chapter of a long emotional cycle, one built on hope, cultural friction, and an exhaustion that had eaten away at her for years. Each time she thought the worst was behind them, another wave of family pressure came crashing in, another reminder that she was foreign, older, not accepted, not welcomed, not truly embraced by the very people whose approval Sumit could never fully let go of. And somewhere along the way, all those little cuts turned into something deeper, something permanent. The question everyone was asking in that moment, did Sumit see this coming? Because for once, the signs weren't hidden. Jenny's tone had changed. Her patience had thinned. The laughter, the warmth, the hope in her voice, all slowly fading over time. And yet Sumit seemed blindsided, almost frozen in disbelief, as if the possibility of losing her had never been real to him until now. Which raises a deeper, unresolved thread. If he loved her so much, why didn't he feel the urgency sooner? Why did it take packed bags and a silent goodbye for him to fully understand the weight of everything she'd been carrying? And then comes the biggest unanswered question. The trigger. What was the exact moment that pushed her past her limit? Was it something his family said? A disappointment repeated one time too many? Or simply the realization that she couldn't spend another year begging for respect she had already earned? Whatever it was, Jenny's face said it clearly. She was done fighting battles that were never hers to begin with. The tension in the room wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was the quieter, more dangerous kind, the kind born from years of emotional fatigue. And as she prepared to walk away from the life she had built in India, one truth hung in the air. This time, she wasn't leaving to shock him. This time, she was leaving to save herself. From the very first season, their relationship felt like a leap of faith. Two people trying to build a life together while standing on completely different worlds. Jenny came to India with hope in her luggage, love in her heart, and the belief that sincerity could overcome any cultural wall. And in the beginning, it looked possible. Their chemistry was genuine, their affection undeniable, and viewers could feel how deeply they cared for each other. But it didn't take long for reality to catch up. India wasn't just a new place for Jenny, it was a maze of expectations, traditions, family hierarchies, unspoken rules, and a level of social pressure she had never navigated before. Age gaps aren't just numbers in societies where marriage is tied to family honor. And every time someone mentioned her age, every time a relative raised an eyebrow, every time a neighbor whispered something under their breath, the emotional weight on Jenny grew heavier. Meanwhile, Sumit was stuck balancing love with lifelong conditioning. He understood his culture, his family's fears, and the consequences of going against them. And yet, he also knew Jenny had crossed oceans, literally and emotionally, to be with him. That tension became the heartbeat of their on-screen journey. The visa battles added another layer of stress. Every paperwork delay, every hurdle, every threat of having to leave the country reminded them that their relationship wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening under legal scrutiny, family scrutiny, and the watchful eye of reality TV. Then came the parents, the unmovable barrier. Their disapproval wasn't subtle. It was firm, vocal, and relentless. And with each tearful argument, with each plea from Sumit, with each moment Jenny tried to prove her sincerity, a small piece of the relationship chipped away. Not because they didn't love each other, but because love was constantly forced to compete with loyalty, tradition, and fear. Throughout those seasons, viewers kept asking the same question. Was there a moment where everything could have shifted? A single conversation, a bolder stance from Sumit, a softer response from the family, could any of it have changed the trajectory? And then another question emerged. Did Sumit ever push back enough? He defended Jenny, yes. He stood by her, yes. But did he do it with the force needed to truly break the cycle? Or did he hesitate because he was torn between two worlds that both meant something to him? And in the background, cameras were always rolling. Reality TV doesn't create emotions, but it amplifies them. When tensions rise, producers know when to ask the right questions, when to film the hardest conversations, when to capture the tears, hesitation, and doubt. From the very first season, their relationship felt like a leap of faith. Two people trying to build a life together while standing on completely different worlds. Jenny came to India with hope in her luggage, love in her heart, and the belief that sincerity could overcome any cultural wall. And in the beginning, it looked possible. Their chemistry was genuine, their affection undeniable, and viewers could feel how deeply they cared for each other. But it didn't take long for reality to catch up. India wasn't just a new place for Jenny, it was a maze of expectations, traditions, family hierarchies, unspoken rules, and a level of social pressure she had never navigated before. Age gaps aren't just numbers in societies where marriage is tied to family honor, and every time someone mentioned her age, every time a relative raised an eyebrow, every time a neighbor whispered something under their breath, the emotional weight on Jenny grew heavier. Meanwhile, Sumit was stuck balancing love with lifelong conditioning. He understood his culture, his family's fears, and the consequences of going against them. And yet, he also knew Jenny had crossed oceans, literally and emotionally, to be with him. That tension became the heartbeat of their on-screen journey. The visa battles added another layer of stress. Every paperwork delay, every hurdle, every threat of having to leave the country reminded them that their relationship wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening under legal scrutiny, family scrutiny, and the watchful eye of reality TV. Then came the parents, the unmovable barrier. Their disapproval wasn't subtle, it was firm, vocal, and relentless. And with each tearful argument, with each plea from Sumit, with each moment Jenny tried to prove her sincerity, a small piece of the relationship chipped away. Not because they didn't love each other, but because love was constantly forced to compete with loyalty, tradition, and fear. Throughout those seasons, viewers kept asking the same question. Was there a moment where everything could have shifted? A single conversation, a bolder stance from Sumit, a softer response from the family. Could any of it have changed the trajectory? And then another question emerged. Did Sumit ever push back enough? He defended Jenny, yes. He stood by her, yes. But did he do it with the force needed to truly break the cycle? Or did he hesitate because he was torn between two worlds that both meant something to him? And in the background, cameras were always rolling. Reality TV doesn't create emotions, but it amplifies them. When tensions rise, producers know when to ask the right questions, when to film the hardest conversations, when to capture the tears, hesitation, and doubt. Jenny's breaking point didn't arrive with a loud moment. It arrived in the slow, heavy silence that settled on her face during the moments viewers have seen on screen. The kind of silence where a person has nothing left to negotiate, defend, or explain. She sat there with tired eyes, not angry, not yelling, only drained. That was the clue. The collapse didn't come from one fight. It came from years of feeling like she was living between two worlds without belonging to either. You could see it in her posture during those final tense scenes. She wasn't leaning forward anymore. She wasn't debating. She wasn't trying to convince anyone that her relationship deserved respect. She had done that for so long that the effort no longer made sense. Her spirit looked worn, like a traveler who has carried bags too heavy for too many years. That is the moment viewers realized this wasn't another temporary pause. Something inside her had shifted from hoping to deciding. Jenny had weathered so much on camera. The visa pressure, the waiting, the stalled marriage plans, the arguments sparked by cultural differences, the repeated cycles of approval and disapproval. Each setback took a piece of her patience. Each delay chipped at her sense of stability. On screen, she often tried to keep her tone steady, but the strain showed through in the small moments. the way she held her breath before answering, the way she looked away when the topic turned to family, the way she swallowed her frustration because she didn't want to start another fight. Living in another country brought its own challenges. The unfamiliar rules, the scrutiny from outsiders, the constant anxiety about how she was being perceived. She tried to adapt again and again, but adaptation has limits. When the heart feels unwelcome, even the simplest interaction becomes exhausting. Viewers could sense that she was reaching a point where every compromise felt like losing a piece of herself. There were clues she had warned Sumit earlier, not in dramatic statements, but in the tired remarks where she said she could not keep doing this. The way she tried to explain that she needed safety, consistency, and a feeling of being chosen fully. Sometimes she spoke with frustration, sometimes she spoke with resignation. Either way, she was telling him, slowly, that her patience was not infinite. The question is whether Sumit understood her silence. He may have mistaken it for calm. He may have assumed time would smooth things over, the way it had in the past. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is a person preparing to walk away. And by the time he realized how deep her exhaustion ran, the emotional distance had already widened. Her final choice was not sudden. It was the outcome of everything viewers saw building across seasons. She chose peace over noise. She chose clarity over confusion. She chose herself after years of choosing everyone else. And even though the moment felt quiet, the impact was huge. It was the kind of decision that changes not only a relationship, but the person making it. The question that lingers now is simple. If she reached this point so slowly and so visibly, why was Sumit still so shocked when she said she was done? ChatGPT said Sumit's emotional collapse didn't come out of nowhere. Viewers saw a man who had spent years juggling fear, loyalty, pressure, and hope suddenly realize the one person who stood by him was reaching the door, not in anger but in exhaustion. His breakdown was intense because it wasn't fueled by surprise. It was fueled by the shock of consequences finally landing. For so long, he lived in a space where problems eventually faded or delayed plans softened the tension. But this time, the look on Jenny's face told him there was nothing to postpone. She was not bluffing. She was not venting. She was done. When he broke down, it wasn't about performance. His body language showed panic. His voice cracked. His eyes shifted between pleading and disbelief. He had grown used to her patience, to her waiting, to her giving him space while he figured out family conflict. But when she finally pulled back, he felt the ground shift under him. This wasn't a fight they could recover from overnight. This was the moment he had privately feared but avoided acknowledging. There's a psychological pattern many couples recognize in moments like these. One partner hesitates, delays decisions, or tries to keep peace on both sides. The other grows tired. The hesitation doesn't look harmful in the moment, but over time, it piles up until the partner who once waited now feels empty. When that partner withdraws, the hesitant person snaps awake and feels the full weight of losing stability. Sumit showed signs of that pattern. He often froze when decisions required confrontation, especially when family expectations were involved. Yet when Jenny pulled away, he reacted with urgency he hadn't shown earlier. Was his fear rooted in love or guilt? That's the question viewers keep asking. Love was clearly present. His attachment to her was visible in the way he reached for her when she tried to walk away and the way he panicked at the thought of life without her. But guilt also played a role. Years of conflict with his family left him trapped between hurting them or hurting her, and every time he tried to choose both, someone paid the price. Seeing Jenny reach her limit meant he had to face the idea that his indecision caused real emotional damage. Losing her would force him to confront choices he avoided for too long. Another question hangs in the air. Did he want the relationship itself, or the comfort it gave him? Jenny represented stability, understanding, and acceptance. She stood by him when everything else was tense. When she stepped back, it felt like losing his emotional anchor. It's possible he didn't realize how dependent he had become on her presence until it slipped away. The next open loop is whether he will finally fight or freeze again. His breakdown showed a man who wanted to hold on to the relationship, but wanting something in an emotional moment is different from taking action afterward. Viewers have seen him cry and promise change before, only to fall into old patterns once the storm passed. This situation feels different because Jenny didn't meet his emotion with softness. She met it with quiet resolve. Her silence pushed him into the unknown. Would he rise to the challenge this time and confront the fears he kept avoiding? Or would he collapse again once the immediate panic faded? His tears were raw, but they were not the final answer. The real question is whether those tears turn into change or retreat, and whether he understands that Jenny's decision didn't come from a single argument, but from years of carrying the emotional weight alone. The tension between Jenny and Sumit would have been heavy even in private, but reality TV has a way of turning slow fractures into sharp breaks. Viewers often forget how filming changes the rhythm of conflict. When cameras are on, people speak faster, react quicker, and reach emotional limits sooner. Not because feelings are fake, but because being watched adds weight to every word. A quiet disagreement becomes a scene. A pause becomes pressure, a sigh becomes a storyline. Long shooting days chip away at patience. Most couples argue, cool off, regroup, and move forward at their own pace. But for Jenny and Sumit, those emotional cycles played out under lights, microphones, and interview prompts. Conflicts that might have resolved overnight lingered into the next day because production needed continuity. The emotional reset most couples get wasn't always available to them. The exhaustion built on itself until even simple conversations felt raw. Time pressure also shapes reactions. Filming schedules demand that certain discussions happen within a specific window. When you compress real feelings into set hours, emotions come out sharper. Jenny's frustration and Sumit's hesitation were not created by cameras, but the environment intensified them. You could see it in how quickly their arguments escalated and how their confessional interviews pulled hidden fears closer to the surface. Editing also plays a role. It doesn't invent scenes, but it highlights patterns. The show tends to emphasize moments where their differences hit hardest. When a story focuses on conflict, people watching feel the weight of it far more than the calm moments in between. For Jenny and Sumit, this meant the world saw every tear, hesitation, and disappointment. Even if they had brief, peaceful pockets behind the scenes, audiences mostly witnessed the storms. And living through those storms while knowing millions would later judge them added another layer of stress. There's also the emotional drain of being asked to explain your feelings repeatedly on camera. Confessionals require people to revisit arguments, articulate insecurities, and describe the emotional logic behind every choice. Some couples find clarity from that process, others feel exposed. Jenny often looked tired in those interviews, as if she was reliving the same heartbreak twice. Sumit sometimes struggled to articulate what he felt, and the effort showed on his face. These interviews don't force feelings, but they make people examine their own pain more intensely. Then there's the simple truth. Some parts of any relationship are too raw to show fully. Viewers only get fragments, edited for pacing and narrative. The quiet moments where Jenny sat alone processing everything. The nights when Sumit wrestled with guilt and fear, the conversations they had off camera about staying, leaving, or trying again. Those unfilmed moments often carry the emotional weight that explains what viewers later see on screen. The open question is how much of their collapse happened because cameras accelerated the emotional timeline. Would Jenny have reached her breaking point at the same moment if she had more privacy? Would Sumit have reacted differently if he wasn't already stretched thin by public scrutiny? And what parts of their emotional journey were filtered out because they were too painful or too personal for television? That's the lingering mystery. The show revealed plenty, but the deepest strain might have unfolded quietly, away from the lens. The moment Jenny stepped away from the life she built in India, the emotional shock settled in like a cold wave. Years of routine, familiarity, and shared memories don't disappear the second someone leaves. They linger, they echo. Viewers felt that weight as the camera followed her through those final scenes. She wasn't storming out. She wasn't making a point. She looked like someone who had held on for so long that letting go felt like the only way to breathe again. The silence around her departure made everything feel heavier because it showed how much she had already processed before that moment. Starting over isn't simple at any age. Leaving a country where you've adapted your habits, your rhythm, your daily comforts comes with its own heartbreak. Jenny had built friendships, routines, and emotional ties in India. Even the things that frustrated her had become part of her world. When she walked away, she wasn't only leaving Sumit. She was leaving a chapter of her life that took years to shape. That kind of transition doesn't hit all at once. It lands in waves. The first wave is relief. The next is loneliness. The one after that is the slow realization that rebuilding will take time. Public reaction added another layer to the aftermath. Viewers across social media reacted fast, many expressing sympathy for her exhaustion and how long she held everything together. Others questioned whether this breakup would stick, because the couple has had cycles of conflict and reconciliation for years. Those reactions matter because they remind both of them that their relationship isn't private. Every decision will be dissected, replayed, and judged by people who have never lived their experience. That kind of scrutiny follows you even after you leave. It becomes a part of how you think about the future. Sumit's reaction during this aftermath is its own emotional story. He looked lost after she left, as if he was trying to rewrite the moment in his mind. That empty space where she used to be was a shock he wasn't prepared for. His routine was built around her presence. The house, the morning rituals, the small conversations that filled daily life, all of it changed instantly. The question now is whether he will sit in that emptiness or take action. Some viewers believe he will try to follow her. Others think he will collapse under the same fear that held him back for years. Distance changes relationships, but it doesn't erase history. Every unresolved issue becomes louder when people are apart. Every regret feels sharper. Jenny's decision to leave forced both of them to face truths they avoided. She needed peace. He needed clarity. Whether distance creates that clarity or deepens the divide remains to be seen. There's also the emotional aftershock of leaving a place where you tried so hard to fit in. Jenny spent years adapting to a culture different from her own. She learned routines, customs, and habits that became part of her life. Walking away from that means relearning yourself without the environment that shaped you during those years. It's a quiet kind of grief because it doesn't come from one moment. It comes from realizing how much of your identity shifted in the process. As for Sumit, the open loop sits right at the center of his emotional fallout. Does he fear losing Jenny forever, or does he fear facing the choices he avoided? Will he step forward and try to rebuild, or freeze the way he has in the past? His breakdown showed raw emotion, but emotion is only the beginning. What he does next will determine if this separation becomes the final chapter or the start of something different. One question keeps echoing. After everything they've been through, is Jenny's departure the end of the road, or the pause before one of them decides to bridge the distance? Jenny and Sumit's story isn't just a reality TV moment. It's a case study in the limits of love under pressure. Watching it unfold across seasons gives insight into the emotional labor one partner often carries while trying to maintain harmony between personal desires and family expectations. Jenny's commitment was visible, undeniable, and repeated over years. She adapted to another country, engaged with Sumit's family, and weathered cultural and emotional turbulence. Yet, even the most patient, loving partner has a breaking point. Her departure highlights that sacrifice has limits when it begins to cost peace of mind and personal well-being. Boundaries play a silent but decisive role here. Jenny tried to establish them in subtle ways, through words, pauses, and eventually actions. Boundaries in cross-cultural relationships are not just about preferences. They are shields against constant emotional erosion. When Sumit hesitated, delayed, or prioritized family over her repeatedly, those boundaries were tested. Over time, viewers saw a tension build between her willingness to accommodate and her need for self-preservation. The question arises, when is compromise no longer compromise, but emotional depletion? Jenny's choice answers that silently, showing that protecting oneself sometimes requires walking away, no matter how much love exists. Cultural identity adds layers that most reality TV narratives don't show. Sumit grew up with deeply ingrained norms that shaped how he expressed love and loyalty. These norms weren't inherently negative, but they created constraints. He wanted to please Jenny, but he also wanted to avoid breaking bonds with his family. That tension, so subtly present in every argument, confession, and hesitant step, demonstrates how long-term relationships can strain under conflicting identities. It's not about choosing the right culture, it's about how individuals navigate overlapping loyalties without losing themselves or each other. Jenny's leaving was the ultimate signal that sometimes navigating these forces alone is unsustainable. Emotional labor is another lens for understanding this breakup. Jenny absorbed years of frustration, disappointment, and uncertainty. She had to moderate her own expectations while managing the emotional swings of her partner and his family. Sumit, meanwhile, carried guilt, indecision, and pressure to conform to parental expectations. Both sides gave, but in markedly different ways. One invested in adaptation and emotional patience. The other invested in juggling allegiances and hoped that things might resolve without decisive action. Who sacrificed more? The answer may vary depending on perspective, but the visible outcome shows that imbalance often leads to burnout for the partner, providing steady emotional labor. Love alone is not always enough, as Jenny's departure proves. Commitment, history, and care cannot compensate for chronic misalignment in boundaries, expectations, and emotional responsibility. Viewers are left to ponder whether healing is possible once one partner reaches a breaking point. Rebuilding would require transparent communication, acknowledgement of past exhaustion, and actionable steps to restore trust. It's a monumental task, but not impossible if both parties are willing to confront the reality of what broke them rather than glossing over it. Finally, there's hope, even in heartbreak. Jenny's choice teaches a broader lesson about self-respect and emotional autonomy. Walking away doesn't erase love, it redefines it. It signals that love doesn't demand self-destruction. It also leaves the door open for growth, either individually or together, should circumstances shift. For Sumit, the challenge is recognizing the cost of hesitation and deciding whether to act differently if given another chance. Ultimately, their story reframes the idea of love on screen. It's messy, human, and often painful, but it's also instructive. It shows that understanding boundaries, managing emotional labor, and negotiating cultural identity are just as crucial as affection or chemistry. And it leaves one haunting question: after so much strain, is there a way back? Or is some pain meant to be the turning point that shapes both lives forever? Even after Jenny walked away, the story didn't fully land in the way viewers expected. Reality TV gives the drama, but it rarely shows the entire emotional landscape. Audiences were left with raw scenes, yes, but many threads remain tangled. Did Sumit fully process the cost of years of inaction? Did Jenny anticipate that leaving might finally force clarity, or was it only about reclaiming her own peace? These questions hover because reality TV captures highlights, not the quiet, unseen negotiations of the heart. Some of the biggest unanswered questions revolve around their communication. On screen, we saw Jenny's quiet breaking point, Sumit's panic, and their brief exchanges at the door. But what was said, or left unsaid, in the hours before cameras rolled? Were there moments where either partner considered compromise or tried to bridge the widening gap without filming it? Those conversations, if they happened, were private and now exist as gaps in the narrative, leaving viewers to piece together motivation from limited evidence. Then there's the matter of timing. Why now? Why this exact moment? Jenny's decision didn't arise spontaneously. It was the culmination of years of cultural pressure, family friction, and repeated emotional exhaustion. But did the show fully capture the incremental triggers that finally tipped her over? The layers of context, the quiet irritations, the repeated misunderstandings, the subtle cues of emotional fatigue were hinted at, but the full picture is left to speculation. Fans are left asking whether any single incident sparked her departure, or whether it was simply the slow burn of years reaching its inevitable conclusion. Off-camera dynamics are another puzzle. Reality TV compresses months into hours, but life doesn't work that way. What happened in moments we didn't see? Did small gestures of support or disagreement alter how each approached the next filmed interaction? Could a private conversation have softened the final moment or made it sharper? We only get fragments, so viewers are left wondering whether the heart of their connection was stronger or weaker than what aired. Finally, there's the emotional aftermath that remains largely unexplored. How do you rebuild a life after walking away from a partner, a home, and a country? How does someone process years of sacrifice and yet step into the unknown? For Sumit, the question lingers. Does fear of loss outweigh the lessons of inaction? And for Jenny, is peace sustainable? Or does the pull of unresolved love resurface? The show leaves these questions unanswered, creating an ongoing tension that keeps audiences talking long after the episode ends.